is communication to and from the board, including public comments. Ms. Plesky.
Good evening, everyone. We now move to the public comment session of our agenda. The board welcomes comments on agenda items from citizens who have completed public comment cards, which are accepted until the beginning of the meeting and are not transferable to other speakers. Please be advised that the information shared in public comment is not endorsement of the information shared by the presenter and solely provides the opinion of the individual speaker, not the district. During the public comment period, comments should be directed to the Board of Trustees only, not other attendees, and only made once you have been called upon to speak. To ensure that all speakers are treated equally and have the same amount of time, the podium microphone will be turned off at the conclusion of the time for every speaker. Each speaker shall have 1 minute to address the board regarding items on the agenda for this meeting. Speakers will be called in order in which each individual signed up to speak. Please keep all public comments related to district business and governance. If you have specific concerns related to an employee of the district or specific student issue, you should utilize the district's grievance procedures provided in board policies DGBA local, FNG local, and GF local. Each grievance procedure allows for an individual to redress grievances with the board of trustees. Additionally, if there are 5 or more individuals that would like to speak on the same topic, you may choose to appoint an individual to speak on behalf of the group. Please remember that the board may not discuss or act upon any issues that are not properly posted on the agenda. If you wish to provide public comment on an item not on this meeting's agenda, please join us for our next community update line, which will be in about 30 minutes.
And I would like to just make a clarification because many of us received outreach from community members asking if we were voting on censuring a trustee this evening, which we are not. So we're only voting on updating language in our board operating procedures, of which that's a component of. So if you're here to speak on behalf of a specific, trustee or concern about censure, you're welcome to do so. But I just want everyone to just have that clarification. We're not voting on censuring this evening. We are only voting on updating that language. So with that, our first speaker is Kathy Gruen, followed by Eric Elliott. Can I ask you to pause really quickly because your microphone is not working, so I just want to make sure everyone can hear you. Just 1 second.
Echo?
There you go. Okay, you can start.
Okay, I'll start over. Good evening. I and many of us here are here to support Marvin Lowe and Stephanie Elad. We, the people, did not err when we voted these representatives into office. They have not disappointed. Since you were going to be discussing censuring Marvin, I'm going to focus on Marvin. I've attended enough board meetings to see that Marvin stands for the values held by the majority of us. It's apparent he cares about the children, he uses common sense, and he holds individuals accountable. We don't want people on the school board who are going to go along with the majority. If that were the case, there would be need for only one board member. I have the utmost respect for the way Marvin conducts himself. He fights for what he believes and he asks the hard questions. Maybe he makes the rest of you uncomfortable. That's okay. Please stop wasting time and energy attacking your time and ours. Thank you.
Eric Elliott, followed by Daniel Elmer, and then Andrew Cucci.
Great, thanks for the time. I want to be clear, I'm here in support of Marvin Lowe tonight. And I appreciate all the work that he's doing for the kids at Frisco ISD. I moved here 5 years ago, purchased a house that I had never stepped foot in simply because it was in Frisco ISD. And with 2 daughters in Frisco ISD, one of them special ed, that was the most important decision that I was making when purchasing a home. Unfortunately, if we fast forward 5 years, my daughter is now further behind than she's ever been in her entire education, and that is no fault of the teachers that she's had. Her teachers are fantastic. This is because this school board continues to play identity politics rather than focus on the one real job that you have, which is educating our youth. I know Marvin, and I have met with him multiple times. What's important to him is important to me. I thank Marvin for continuing to fight for all the rights of all kids. Thank you.
Daniel, followed by Andrew, and then I just have a first name of Don.
All right, appreciate you all giving me the opportunity to speak. I have some thoughts I'd like to share about board conduct during the community input meeting, but I think I'll start with this. When it relates to the operating procedures being discussed on the agenda tonight, I'm supportive of most of those things. I think debate, public comment is a very important part of what y'all do here. I have 3 quick recommendations and then I'll sit down. While you're taking up board operating procedures, I'd encourage you to extend the duration of public comments to 45 minutes and increase the threshold from 20 to 30 speakers before you cut time for individual speakers. And third, I'd ask that you institute a rule that requires explicit consent from speakers from the podium before using their image, likeness, or words in anything online or anything publicly other than posting the meeting recap on the ISD website. Thank you.
Good evening. I've known Marvin Lowe for a little over a year. I met him on the campaign trail last year. Since our first meeting, I've had the good fortune to have several conversations with Mr. Lowe on numerous occasions. He has been nothing short of what I would call a gentleman. He's very calm and self-effacing, and nothing like has been portrayed in the media or by those making accusations against him. The behavior ascribed to Mr. Lowe is completely out of character to the man I know. Unfortunately, public accusations such as this can tarnish a man's reputation. But we do live in the belief that God knows the truth and will help reveal it. Thank you.
Don, I'm sorry, I don't have a last name. And then Monica Russo, followed by Melinda Preston, and then our final speaker will be Jerry Fuller.
It's Don Gooch, thank you. My mother was a teacher in the Texas public school systems for 31 years. My dad served on the school board in our little small town, Clarendon, Texas. So I'd like to thank you guys. I know it's a difficult job. I wish I wasn't here tonight. I wish we could just talk about education. I want to thank you, Marvin, for being a man of integrity, for standing up for my daughter, for not having to back down to these activists who are wanting boys to go to the bathroom with my daughter and her friends. I can't even believe I'm here having to speak over this. Honestly, it's disgraceful. I like all these comments in the Dallas Morning News about his alleged comments. How about his alleged comments? He said to this young man, he said he loved him, Jesus loved him, that he didn't agree with what they were trying to do, but that he loved him. They seem to have left that out. God bless you, thank you, and thank you for protecting our kids.
First, I'm going to address the changes proposed in Agenda Item 3E, public comment on non-agenda items. That concerns me a bit, and I would like to suggest that we not make that move, as I feel like our board meetings would turn into a free-for-all and encourage people to speak off topic. Next, I'd like to address the topic of censure of a trustee, Item 3A. I do wish the board had the ability to take greater punitive action beyond censure. I'll actually say that. I believe these changes are in response to recent actions that have come to public light by one board trustee. When I first read about these comments, I was horrified. I could not imagine anyone thinking it was appropriate for an adult to engage in conversation with a minor in such a way. As I frequently say, only the individuals involved and God truly know what occurred. I should hope that this trustee takes next steps truly in the best interest of both this board and its students. Thank you.
Renee, is it my turn? Okay, thanks. Well, I wanted to thank the gentleman who spoke about, I'd like for you to get my permission before you blur me out, so, but thank you very much. I'm not sure your name, but I'd like to speak with you afterwards. I want to say that I agree that we need to be careful with limiting minutes. We are the citizens, and we should have our say in what's going on in our city and in our schools. So I would like to ask the same thing that he asked, that instead of making it shorter at 30, make it 40. I don't even know that we've ever hit 30, have we? 30 speakers. Okay. Well, I would like to ask that we move it to 40. Thank you.
And then our final speaker for our special meeting is Jerry Fuller. Did you sign up to speak for this or for community input night? Both? Okay. Sure. Okay.
Shannon Ayers, I guess you don't have a card. On the agenda tonight, there are several changes being proposed to the policies surrounding public comments. I'd like to use my time to draw a quick comparison between how public comments are done at our school board meetings versus our city council meetings. Last week, the city held a special meeting regarding the proposed universal theme park. Much like allowing boys and girls bathrooms and sexually explicit books in libraries, this is an issue that Frisco residents feel strongly about. But unlike the public comments policies of this board, the city council gave residents every opportunity to speak their mind. Although you could, no one had to sign up before the meeting to speak. After each person spoke, the council asked if there was anyone else who wanted to speak. Additionally, there was no time limit. No one had their mic cut mid-sentence. No one had to rush through their comments at record speed to get their thoughts out in a minute or less. Mind you, the room was full. Yet they still allowed everyone who wanted to be heard to have a turn with no restriction on time. Meanwhile, some on this board are trying to add more restrictions to the public comments portion of board meetings. So, if you want more trustees who respect the rights of parents, stop voting for those who try to shut you out.
And then Jerry Fuller.
Hello, I'm Jerry Fuller, Frisco. I can tell you, I met Marvin and Stephanie a year or two ago. Okay, everybody that I'm associated with, quite a few people actually been here a long time. All of us are tired of the identity and the ideologies and all this teaching going on in these ways in the schools. And Marvin comes along. He's just one of the rock stars. He just loves kids and wants to make it education, reading, writing, arithmetic, history. The whole bit. What more do we want? Next thing you know, we're talking about censoring, talking about changing rules for what happens when you censure. Dallas Morning News / Bad News does a hit piece. They've been doing this for years. Anybody who doesn't know that is not reading good news anyway. But I can tell you, we love Marvin, and we'll be here for him.
We'll move on to action item A, consider an act on proposed amendment of board operating procedures related to censure of an individual trustee. Mr. Stockley, you're going to take us through each of these items?
Yes.
Just focus on the first.
I'll just pull it up so I make sure I'm talking about the wrong one. So, starting with item A, so this is the proposed changes that y'all brought to adjust the censure provision that is already in your board operating procedures. In this particular section, there are additions of other options for the board if you were to censure a trustee. Right now, the only listed option is withholding of financial resources like reimbursement for travel. So this change would add additional options for you all if you were to vote to censure someone. None of these options are required. None of them are automatic. If you were to do a censure, these are just additional options for you. We did, when I drafted them based on the requests from y'all, I did make sure we included in there that, you have to abide by the constitutional rights of the individual trustee and their rights as a parent. So those are both mentioned in there as well. So I think that's it, unless y'all have questions.
Board, what questions do you have for Mr. Stockton? We'll open up for discussion.
I'll just make a quick comment. This was, I think, the one change that I did not request. And I just have concerns in general about censure being used as a weapon, which I've seen in some boards across the state. So I'm concerned about adding anything to that language at this time. But my question for you, Mr. Stockton, is there anything that would preclude the board, if there was a reason that the board did decide to censure someone, to have as part of that one or more of these provisions that could be decided upon at the time that censure was voted on?
Can you ask the question again? I'm not sure I understood.
Yeah, so let's say the board decided to censure me because I decided that I think we should paint all the walls purple in our admin building and all of our campuses, and so the board censured me for that. Could they then, I know that's a strange example, but I'm being strange.
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
So could the board then decide, well then, we should not allow Mrs. Alon onto our campuses, we're gonna censure her, and we should not allow her onto our campuses because she might go around painting the walls purple, and we don't want that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yes, the censure provisions in here, there's nothing that limits the use of these options to any particular situation. It would have to be a majority of the vote of the board, and in any censure scenario, the board could use any of the options listed.
Thank you, that helps. I'm not sure my question was clear though. So if we didn't, if this proposal doesn't pass, and one of the components of this proposal is related to allowing trustees on campuses, right? So if this doesn't pass, but later the board decides to prevent me from going onto campuses as part of my censure motion because they're afraid I'm gonna bring a can of paint and paint the walls, could that be done at that time of the censure so that any so-called punitive action related to the censure could be decided on at that time? Is there anything that prevents us from doing that?
Yes. No, not explicitly. To your point, the board really can vote as a majority to kind of do whatever it wants within its power, within its state-given power. You can vote to suspend your own policies, suspend your own procedures, any of those kinds of things, because they're all things you adopted, right, as a majority. So a majority of you can undo anything you've done as a majority. So you could theoretically adopt anything in a censure resolution that you wanted to. So we try to put these procedures in place in writing to make it clearer, but no, you would be able to do that even without this.
Thank you.
I have pictures, David. Danny, this might be a good time to actually explain the difference between what we have in written policy versus what the procedures actually are, using them as a guideline and not necessarily law.
Sure. So obviously first we have, the Constitution, the state constitution, then we have state law, and then even below state law we have local policy, local board policy, which you all adopt as a board. And that really governs the operations of the district. That gives Dr. Waldrop and the rest of staff our direction. It kind of tells us what we're supposed to do. There are a couple of provisions that are specifically related to how y'all operate as a board, but most of the provisions that govern you as a board, kind of your rules for yourselves, are in your board operating procedures. And that's really what this document is it's y'all's rules for yourselves. So, I obviously help you draft them, but this is really, all of these came from y'all. So, different people on the board, but these are y'all's rules for yourselves, and they're designed for you all to kind of govern how you operate as a board.
And just one more thing to that, typically we usually do this as training exercise once a year, which is done sometimes in the summer. We were supposed to do this a couple of times, it's now been changed. So the reason why we're doing this now is because we have not done it yet. So that's what we're doing. So a lot of this stuff was already in there, we just haven't gotten to it.
Yeah, so your board operating procedures do require that you annually reevaluate them, and we did that last in June. So you would be due again this summer, but your board operating procedures also allow 2 trustees to put any item on an agenda. So if 2 trustees decide they want to adjust the operating procedures and they decide to submit that request, then it has to be put on the agenda. That's what happened with all of the 6 changes that you have here.
So I have a question for you, Dan. The bottom line is whatever we write, it doesn't require punitive measures or disallow any punitive measures whether we changed or not. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
What does it mean to censure?
So it's essentially just a statement of kind of disapproval, really. So to censure a trustee, it's there's nothing magical about that language. It's not language that comes from state law. We've had this conversation a couple of times. There's no recall provision for board members. There's no way for the board to to remove a board member. There's no impeachment, anything like that. There are very, very limited circumstances in which a board member can be removed, and that's for official misconduct that has to come from a court. It's very, very limited. And so school boards across the country have chosen to, as a way of governing themselves, include a censure provision, which is basically a board adopting a resolution to say we disapprove of this particular conduct, and then within the confines of the board's authority, taking any particular punitive actions they can.
And that is done in the public, by a public vote of the board. It's not done behind closed doors.
Correct.
It's done.
Correct. You can discuss things potentially behind door, but in closed session, but every vote that you take has to be in public, and the resolution would be public because it would be what you would vote on.
So the abuse of censuring a trustee is something that the public could decide upon.
Yes.
I'm speaking, it's a rhetorical question. I mean,
just like any resolution.
The privilege of doing so, the public would think that could think that they were out of order and make that determination themselves. So in essence, a censure could be a two-way street.
Absolutely.
If it's not used appropriately.
Yeah, absolutely. Any resolution that y'all adopt is public. It's attached in the public board book, and is sometimes read in the board meetings, and then is voted on publicly by the board. So y'all would each individually have to take a vote on any censure resolution. That's actually why it's drafted as a resolution. That's why this procedure requires a censure resolution and not just a vote. You have to put in the specific conduct that the board finds to be problematic, the specific punitive measures. That's all going to be drafted out. Would be drafted out in a resolution that then would be public.
Given all that, I'd add that I've never been part of a board that has censured another member. Certainly hasn't been done in the 9 or so years that I've had the privilege of sitting up here. So this board has never abused that before. But for the reasons that you've given, and the fact that it's done in public and it can be perceived either positively or negatively by the community, I'm generally then in favor of enumerating various consequences that could be attached to one, as we're attempting to do here tonight. To Mr. Lowe's point, not mandatory, but suggested, and would be determined at the time by that board in place at the time. The only one that I have some reservation about, which I think you've told me is one that's already in board operating procedures, and I don't know how the rest of the board feels, is just the one on withholding financial resources. Just a personal feeling that this position is already a very expensive one in time and in resources. And while I know it's not required, that's the only one that gives me a little bit of heartburn here when we incur expenses and need to get them reimbursed. To have that withheld can affect families and things like that as well. So all the other ones make sense.
Hey, Danny, I just have need a little clarification.
Sure.
On C, where you shared that prohibiting we added that prohibiting a trustee to enter our district properties, with an exception of being as a parent. So does that mean that they are limited to the buildings that their students?
So yes, so parents in the family code, in the Texas Family Code, parents have a right to attend school activities. And that's not something we can limit, only courts can limit that, except to the extent that it's disruptive. And there are some limitations. You can't just go and sit in a classroom all day as a parent, but there are some limitations in terms of disruptive to the learning environment. But outside of that, we can't, exclude parents from school buildings. So if we had a board member who was censured, who was a parent, they'd have to be able to go to their kids, extracurricular activities. They have to be able to go eat lunch or pick up the student at school, those kinds of things.
Okay, so this wouldn't limit them to attending a game that may be at a neighboring school within the district?
If their student was participating in that event, they'd be able to go to it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? If not, we're all for a motion for item A.
proposed amendment of board operating procedures related to censure of an individual trustee with the modification of striking line section 2BA.
Motion by Mr. Clacy to adopt the amending by striking A, which is withholding of financial resources, including but not limited to disallowance of reimbursement for expenses.
I'll second.
Second by Ms. Gillespie. All in favor of adopting the resolution with the amended language? All opposed? Motion passes 5-2. We will move on to item B, consider an act on proposed amendment of board operating procedures eliminating the requirement that 2 trustees request an item for it to be placed on the board agenda.
This one is really simple. Currently, in order for an item to be placed on an agenda by the board, 2 trustees have to request that item. This removes that requirement for 2 trustees and would just be 1 trustee.
Or any comments? Okay.
So I'll just speak to that since I did request this item. I think there are 7 representatives of our community of a town of over 200,000 people and 67,000 students. And I think that anyone who sits in one of these 7 seats has the right to put an item on the agenda. I know that there's been some pushback or I've heard that one of the arguments against this is that there could be a rogue trustee that puts things on the agenda, but again, as we discussed earlier, I think the community has the right to make those decisions of who they want to sit in each of these 7 seats. The other thing that I would also add is that for any action item, a motion would have to be not only moved on but seconded in order to have a vote. So if there is a trustee who's putting things on the agenda for a vote that doesn't get the second, because no one else wanted to second that item, when it's time for a vote, then that item will not be voted on, that action item. So I think that kind of takes away some of the concern about, being forced to vote on things that maybe are not necessarily, don't have enough trustee support. So I'll close with that. Thank you.
Because I have a question about eliminating the 2 trustee requirement, and that's mainly because if we're following the Robert's Rules of Order correctly, then we would require a second when we come before a public meeting and we're putting something up on the agenda. So I guess my question to you is, if when we're asking to place something on the agenda, if we don't have a second, then how do we then, when we're asked to vote on something, and we're not able to get a second, how does that work?
The motion would just not be voted on.
So that would be a waste.
So yeah, someone made the motion and there was no second. The board just wouldn't vote on the motion.
But I think just to clarify, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Stockton, an item not to be actioned would be on the agenda. And the action item could also go on the agenda, it just, if no one seconded it, that it would just die right there per Robert's Rules of Order and it wouldn't move to a vote where trustees would be required to vote on something that only one trustee wanted to have a vote on. Is that accurate?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so maybe I might be a little confused. I wanted to make sure I'm understanding this correctly. So if we don't get a second to place something on the agenda, we can't get the support of another trustee to place something on the agenda, then how would we get the support of a second when we're voting on something? Can you?
I don't think that's a question for me. That's not really a legal question, I don't think. That's really y'all, right? That's up to y'all to make that determination of whether or not you want to do that.
I'll tell you, I have some concerns about this simply because we all know the sheer amount of time that it takes for staff members of this district to prepare for these meetings. And if someone haphazardly is able to put it on 30 agenda items because it's important to them, and there's not another trustee that goes in line with that, then staff is now having to spend their time preparing presentations and pulling data and giving us an analysis on things that one person is interested in and that there's no support for. So I know a lot of districts actually require 3 trustees to put something on an agenda. I don't agree with that either, but I do think having someone to make sure that we're utilizing staff's time in a reasonable way is important, because I know that sometimes it doesn't feel this way, but you all have a lot of other jobs than just reporting to the board. So that's my concern about the removal of that provision.
That's a very good point. I wasn't even thinking of that before you said it. What I am thinking of though with this is the requirement to have a second. If we were strictly following Robert's Rules of Order, we would be coming to an action item, making a motion, waiting for a second. If we had a second, then we would have discussion. And only if there was a second would we have discussion. So under strict adherence to Robert's rules, if there wasn't a second person on the board who wanted to entertain an item, we would never even get to discussing it, and we would just move on in the agenda. Is that a good understanding?
Yes, that's correct.
But that doesn't get around your issue, Ms. Archambault, of staff needing time to prepare for an agenda item, not knowing whether or not we're going to dive into it or whether we're not going to dive into it. I think the only way that I would entertain going back down to one, because of those issues, would be if we were to consider adopting a strict adherence to Robert's rules, so that we did that. Because I've said it before. I've said it when I've been running for re-election and had this question posed to me several times in more than one election cycle. If it's not something that any one of our colleagues feels like is worthy of our time, then it's not something that should be put on an agenda for a meeting. I'll add, because I know I've seen it out there in social media, the supposition maybe that requiring that we get a second could be considered a walking quorum, perhaps. I guess that would be something the attorney could tell us. However, I think that there's a distinction between one of us looking for a colleague to say that an item or a topic is worthy of discussion is different from saying that they'll support it once it comes up for a vote. If you think about the way Congress behaves, and there aren't a lot of good examples, but one of the things that they do is they vote about whether or not they're going to vote. And that's kind of how I see it being too. But not going on any further, I think I'd only support doing this if we were to look at doing a strict adherence to Robert's rules, so that we had the motion second and then discussion. And that's not what's before us tonight.
Board, any other comments or questions? If not, I will look for a motion for item B.
I move to approve the proposed amendment of board operating procedures eliminating the requirement that two trustees request an item for it to be placed on a board agenda.
Motion by Ms. Alon. Second by Mr. Lowe. All in favor? All opposed? Motion fails 5-2. Move on to item C. Consider an act on the proposed amendment of board operating procedures, adjusting the order of board meeting agendas. Mr. Stockton.
So this is another really straightforward one. This would just require public comment to be immediately after recognitions and before any non-action discussion items or presentations that you all have on an agenda.
Board, questions, comments?
I'll just make a comment because I recommended this change as well. I've seen many times, and even just my short tenure in the board, where community members are waiting and waiting and waiting to address their board, and we don't ever know exactly when that time is going to come. Could be 8 o'clock, could be 9:15, could be 10:30, based on how many other items are on the agenda for discussion, for recognition, etc. I want to make sure that community members who take the time to show up to our meetings have the opportunity to address the board. I know we have community input night, but we don't tend to have as many action items, if any. Tonight's kind of an exception to that. Typically, community input nights are really just related to hearing the community. So I would like to make it more accessible for the community members who wish to come speak to their elected representatives and not have to wait 3 hours in some cases to do it. And I see them walking out because they just get tired of waiting. And so I'd like to move it up earlier. I know that some districts do this, typically after the recognition or in some cases before. But I really believe that we should give them that chance so they don't have to sit here all night. Some of the things we go through can be long and tedious, and I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to address us as a board in that way.
know that it's hard sometimes when you've got kids at home waiting on you to do things that, waiting for your turn to speak and public input is difficult when you don't know when exactly it's going to be and how late it's going to be. But here's why I think that the way that it's currently structured is a better way. The way we, and Danny, please correct me if I'm wrong, the way we currently do the agenda is we have all presentations and discussion items at the front after recognitions, then public comment, and then action items, right?
Correct. Sometimes an action item will have a presentation that is done at the time of the action item. We have, on very rare occasions, split them into a presentation and then acted on the same item later in the meeting. But most of the time you have non-action agenda items, public comment, and then action items.
So I like the idea of, we obviously make a decision and vote after we've received information from not only staff on an item, but from members of the public. And that's a good thing, because we're fully informed then by everybody who's taking the time to show up and what staff has to say professionally on the topic. I like the idea of public comment also being informed by those presentations before they are given. That way, it's a more informed speaker, and they're providing that information still to the board before we actually vote and make a decision. That's why I think it's important, as early in the meeting as it can be, I agree with, but after staff presentations, I think is important for that reason. Coupled with the fact that when we don't do special meetings like we did tonight, community input night exists, and that's a certainty of the start time, 6:30 p.m. If you need more certainty, come and speak at one of those, and you can do it on anything. It doesn't have to be an agenda item, topic, or anything like that. It can be any topic you want. And we've been providing those opportunities on a monthly basis as well. So.
I'd like to ask a question. When someone comes to comment, excuse me, on a particular action item or agenda item, they already know what they're going to do. So is it your suggestion that maybe throughout the presentation they'll change their mind or their perspective on what they have to say based on getting the presentation time?
Yes, I think that's possible. Yeah. I mean, especially when it's new information that they haven't had the time to absorb or wasn't available for them to absorb before the meeting.
I think my colleague has already said several points that I already wanted to say, Mr. Classy. So, but yeah, I do agree that we do have to respect the time of the parents. There are a lot of things happening, but at the same time, coming here and then getting an opportunity to, watch some of our students get some accolades, being recognized, some of our teams. I think that will help them to get a bigger picture about our school district and also understand a little bit more about the topic they are about to speak, sometimes if it is within the agenda. Another very important thing that he already mentioned, we already have the community input nights. And then these two are not the only ways of communicating with the board. We have the leaders email, and then individual emails are also available on our websites. And if there is any need to meet the principal or the specific campus, and then those opportunities are also there. So we are in no way limiting anybody from communicating with any one of us. And I think keeping the way it is will just ensure the community members to know a little bit more through this board meetings.
To be clear, the proposal is to have the public comments after recognition before discussion items, correct? I just want to make sure I understand correctly. That's what I thought it was. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Any other comments or questions? If not, I will look for a motion.
I move to adopt the amendment of board operating procedures adjusting the order of board meeting agendas.
Motion by Ms. Lund, second by Mr. Lowe. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes. We'll now move on to item B, consider and act on proposed amendment of board operating procedures adjusting the structure of public comment. Mr. Scott.
So, excuse me, sorry. So this one is a little bit more complex. This is a proposal to basically adjust the order that we do public comment session in. So this is kind of hard to explain. There's a public hearing that can happen on certain items, and honestly, state law is not very clear on how that's supposed to be different than public comment, except that it has to be listed as a public hearing. You I'll have that on things like the budget, the tax rate, those kinds of things. So when we have those items, we have public hearing first. People can sign up to speak on that particular item in that hearing, and then they can separately sign up to speak in what we've been calling public testimony in your procedures. And so that's kind of how it's broken up right now. This proposal would add a third section to the public comment session called stakeholder testimony. And this would essentially split what is currently public testimony into two sections, stakeholder testimony and then public testimony. Stakeholder testimony would be public comment from Frisco ISD parents, employees, students, and other Frisco ISD residents. And then public testimony would be everybody else. So the stakeholder testimony would be first. Within that section, it would still be based on who signed up first. It would still be in the same order as who signed up. And then once we were done with stakeholder testimony, we'd move to public testimony, which would be anybody not in one of those groups. And again, it would still be in the order they signed up. All of the same rules in terms of time limits and all of that kind of stuff applies. It's just changing the order in which we hear from people who sign up to speak.
Board, any questions or comments?
I guess just a question, what is the rationale for structuring it this way versus the way we're currently structuring it?
I would defer to the board members who requested the item on that.
Yeah, I was one of the folks that requested that. I just think that it's important, especially as our public comment, the section of our meetings has become a bit more heated and as of late. I think it's important that those that are in the audience and those that are watching on the stream know if they're hearing from Frisco ISD constituents or if they're hearing from someone outside of our district. So I think it's important.
In the order that you laid it out, Mr. Stockman, that would also allow stakeholders, as you define them, to speak first and earlier in the evening.
Correct. Yeah, I'd go stakeholders first and then the rest of the public testimony.
How would that be determined? So when they sign up,
Yeah,
they have to.
So everyone has to submit their name and address when they sign up as part of the public comment form. So we would order based on that, based on the information provided to us.
Board, any other questions, comments about
Move to adopt the proposed amendment of board operating procedures adjusting the structure of public comment.
motion by Mr. Clacy? Second by Mr. Benigni. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes 6-1. We will move on to item E, consider an act on proposed amendment of board operating procedures allowing public comment on non-agenda items at regular board meetings. Mr. Stockman.
So this one is pretty much exactly what you just said. We'll just allow public comment on non-agenda items at regular meetings. Right now, public comment is only allowed on agenda items, and in order to speak on a non-agenda item, that's at community input night only.
Board, any questions, comments?
I have a question. So in addition to our constituents speaking on non-agenda items for regular board meetings, it will also do so in community input night?
Yes, this change does not remove community input night.
It's the same thing. Okay.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to clarify, I don't see it here now, but I believe that, it was suggested to remove community input nights. Is that not the case at this point in time?
So I'll defer to the board members who request that.
That was withdrawn.
Oh,
That
okay.
request was withdrawn.
Okay.
I mean, I'll just comment, since I did propose this one as well. You know, I know that we have community input night, and sometimes it's well attended, like tonight, which is great, and sometimes it's not, but I do, and this is actually what I've requested, is a change back to how I believe the board used to operate, where we used to allow comments on both. And I've noticed the last few meetings, we have allowed comments on non-agenda items. Speakers have talked on things that were not on the agenda, and we allowed it. So I think, you know, again, some people prefer to address their board during a regular posted board meeting versus a community input night. Board meetings have to happen. Community input nights can be canceled for various reasons. We have to have, we're required to have a certain number of board meetings. And I just think that for community members to be able to address their board whatever they wish is important. And again, this is proposing a change to go back to something that we used to do. That was prior to my tenure on the board, I believe, but it used to be that way.
Board, any other questions, or I'll look for a motion?
I just want to get a clarification. So the request to stop the community input night information?
That part of the provision was removed. It's just, we're just removing the non-agenda item, removing the agenda item requirement for public comment. That's the only thing. Community input nights will still stay.
So yeah, if this change was adopted, you would have non-agenda item, you could have public comment on non-agenda items at both your regular meetings, your special meetings, your workshops, and then in addition to that, you would also still have community input night where people can speak on anything.
All right, sorry for getting back on this. So that means even if somebody is not, even if the non-agenda item is not discussed on a specific board meeting, then we'll still have an opportunity for any community member to come and speak about the non-agenda item on a community input night.
Currently, yes, that's correct.
Thanks.
I like the idea of, I mean, I could go either way on this one really, but where my head's at currently with it is, it hasn't been that long since we've made these changes to it. I think where my head's at with it right now is to let this practice continue through the end of the school year, see how that goes with continuing to have the monthly community input nights, and then, the current practice at our regular board meetings and special board meetings, and then revisit this in the summertime if there's something about it that's not working, to go into the school year with a fresh calendar that the public can see at that time and know and prepare for, as opposed to these knee-jerk back and forths that we've been doing. I don't even know if this has been in place now for a full year, but if it hasn't, it hasn't been for much longer than that. So anyway, that's me speaking out loud, thinking out loud.
I'll look for a motion.
I move to adopt the proposed amendment of board operating procedures allowing public comment on non-agenda items at regular board meetings.
Motion by Ms. Lund. Second by Mr. Lowe. All in favor? All opposed? Motion fails. We'll now move on to item F. Consider an act on proposed amendment to board operating procedures requiring trustees to notify the board of certain investigations.
Yeah, so this is a new section that would be added to your procedures, which would require any trustee who becomes aware that he or she is the subject of a criminal investigation, specifically related to allegations of either sexual conduct with a child or assault of a child, to provide written notice of that investigation to the board. It is limited to just criminal investigations in those situations. And then it would require, the written notification actually would go to the board president or vice president if it was the board president making the notification. And then it would require the board to hold a discussion of that in closed session within 5 business days of that report being received.
Board, we spoke a bit about this in closed, and this was something that Stephanie and I added to the agenda. We don't really have a mechanism by which a report on some type of criminal investigation is reported to the board, and so we just want to make sure, obviously, that every possible safeguard that we have in place for not only trustees, but just as we would for employees in our district, that if there is a criminal investigation that is happening with a trustee, that requirement to report exists. We just don't have that currently, so it's more of just a safety net, just much like we have for our employees in our district.
One other thing I was just going to mention, I should have mentioned this before, is we did make a slight change to this from what it was posted on the agenda. So 2C, or what was attached to the agenda, 2C was originally attached to the agenda, and that provision was just about making it clear that once this report has been made and the board has had this closed session discussion, if the board felt like it was appropriate, the board could immediately then move to censure, not in the same meeting, but could move forward with the censure procedures that are laid out in section 3. and wouldn't have to go back through kind of the procedures that are in section 1. The way that it's structured, it wasn't really clear without 2C, but based on concerns of it kind of appearing redundant and those kinds of things, we removed 2C and added instead in the new section 3, and that first line, if after the discussion of a concern or a report under section 2, just to make it clear that those censure provisions can be gone right into after this report. So I just wanted to make that change clear.
And board, for those of you following along in board book, that is on page 150, and it's section 2, provision C, that we amended the language in closed session. So when you make your motion, whoever decides to do so, just please make sure to mention that amended language.
I just wanted to add that I did request this item, and I thank President Archambault for partnering with me and seconding it, just because there was an incident outside of our district where this actually did occur, and I felt like for a good faith measure to the community that we agree to hold ourselves, responsible and accountable community which we serve, especially as it relates to any kind of criminal investigation regarding something towards a child. So just wanted to share the reason for the genesis.
Board, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll look for a motion.
President Archambault, would you mind making the motion? I was going to make it, but you just added that language, and I'm afraid I might.
So I move to approve, consider, and act on the proposed amendment of board operating procedure requiring trustees to notify the board of certain investigations with the amended language on 2C that was discussed and closed. Motion by me, second by Ms. Alad. All in favor? Motion passes 7-0. We will move on to item G. Let me make sure that's correct. Okay, yes. Item G, consider an act on a resolution authorizing the chief appraiser or other employee of the appraisal district to act as an agent for the school district.
Before we go on to that, I just wanted to thank Mr. Stockton, because I probably sent him 24 emails about all of these changes, and I appreciate all of his updating the language, so thank you.
Item G is a resolution authorizing the chief appraiser or another designated individual at the Collin County Appraisal District to file a property value protest on our behalf. This stems from the release of the Comptroller's School District Property Value Study findings, which were released on February 1st. Every summer, the our county appraisal districts certify property values to the Comptroller. They go through a property value study, and then they let us know whether their findings in that study are either valid or invalid, and invalid just means they're outside of a 5% confidence interval. Ours in the Collin County portion of the district were found to be invalid or outside that confidence interval for this year. This is not anything that we did wrong. It's also not unusual, especially in a year like we've had where property values have just been going crazy. The county appraises goes on July 1st. They're not studied until the following year. So it happens. We have 40 days to file a protest with the Comptroller's office, and the appraisal district will do that on our behalf, which we would like them to do since they're the ones that have all the data and certify the property values. So you guys have to approve as our governing body for the Comptroller or for the appraisal district to file that protest on our behalf.
Board, any questions for Ms. Smith? If not, I'll look for a motion.
Move to adopt a resolution authorizing the chief appraiser or other employee of the appraisal district to act as agent for the school district.
Motion by Mr. Clacy, second by Ms. Davis. All in favor? Motion passes 7-0. We'll now move on to consent agenda, and prior to us voting, Ms. Alad is asked to pull consent agenda item 1 and 4. So do you want to?
You want to do those first?
Let's do those first.
Okay, that's fine. So regarding the missed school day waiver request, I guess what I'm looking for is really an explanation of just how we go about doing this. So we calendar in, or we add to the calendar 2 days a year to use for bad weather if we have to cancel school, so then we make up those days. Where I guess I'm struggling a little, because I've seen this not just this year, but other years as well, where we have the bad weather days, but then we don't use the bad weather makeup days. And so I'm having a hard time kind of wrapping my mind around A, how that works, and B, why we would do it that way. So I see Wes nodding his head. I don't know if anybody's going to explain that to me or not, but I would appreciate an explanation. Thank you.
I will do my best. So we typically do build in a couple of bad weather days in a general calendar. That is basically a little bit of security so that we do not have to extend the school year. A few years ago, TA required